the Manetti Shrem Art Museum. My name is Maya and I'm a Visitor Services Student Staffer. Before we begin tonight's program, we should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which UC Davis sits. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: Cachel-Dihi Band of Wintu Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, Quetzal-Dihi Wintu Nation, and Yochu-Dihi Wintu Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young throughout generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. Thank you so much.
Welcome everyone to the Eugene Lunn Memorial Lecture. We have an exciting program today, which includes a talk by our distinguished guests, a question and answer session, and then a free reception. First, I'd like to welcome Estela Atequana, Dean of the College of the Letters and Sciences, who will make introductory remarks.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to join all of you today for the Eugene Lunn Memorial Lecture. Thank you for the introduction. I'm delighted to welcome everyone, including our distinguished guests, Veronika Franz and Severin Fiala, who've traveled to be with us, and I think I'm understanding they're coming all the way from Austria. Yeah. And this is their first time to Davis, to UC Davis, so it's a very special welcome to all of you. We are especially excited this year as the Lunn Lecture coincides with the premiere of Veronika and Severin's extraordinary film, The Devil's Bath. This film not only showcases the talent of 2 award-winning filmmakers, but also elevates the stature of our own university by bringing academic research to a wider international audience. The Devil's Bath, which has already won a Silver Bear at the Berlin International Film Festival and is Austria's official entry for upcoming Academy Awards, was inspired by the book Suicide by Proxy in Early Modern Germany, Crime, Sin, and Salvation of our own Professor of History, Manetti Stuart. So Kathy, alongside Michael, are organizing this year's lecture. And so we owe you a great thank you and your dedication for continuing this work. The Eugene Lunn Memorial Lecture Series holds a special place in our college and campus community. For 30 years, it has brought acclaimed speakers to UC Davis, each addressing critical cultural issues through a historical lens. Previous speakers include intellectual luminaries such as Richard Rorty, Jill Lepore, Louis Menand, Stacy Schiff, Robert Paul Harrison. This lecture series honors the legacy of Professor Eugene Lunn, a transformative figure in our history department and a renowned scholar in modern European intellectual history. His students established this series to continue his legacy of exploring history's significance to contemporary society. And today, it remains a cornerstone of our college. Professor Lunn's contributions extended far beyond academia. As a beloved teacher, he had a profound impact on his students, inspiring many to follow his path and dedicate their lives to the study of history. It is this commitment to mentorship and intellectual exploration that makes our college exceptional. I hear from UC Davis alumni across the country how faculty like Professor Lunn inspire them to live impactful lives and remain engaged with history. Today, we are fortunate to have some of Professor Lunn's family members with us, including emeritus. Some family members are with us today. We also have Emeritus Professor Donna Reed. Where is she? Is she in the room? His daughter, Rachel. Is Rachel here? Welcome. And her husband, Stephen. Is not here? Give him our best wishes. And who continue to support and enrich our community. At the College of Letters and Science, we take great pride in being home to UC Davis's history department, and nearly half of the university's undergraduate majors. Our faculty not only shape the minds of our students on campus, but also impact communities beyond it through scholarship that reaches a national and international audiences. This commitment is embodied in projects like the Devil's Bath, which began after Veronika and Severin heard about Kathy's book on National Public Radio, This American Life. I often listen to This American Life. Today's lecture, From Reality to Truth, Recreating History in Film, will give us insight into the filmmakers' creative journey as they grapple with transforming historical research into visual storytelling. We've just completed our 5-year strategic plan for the college, called Greater Together for the Common Good, which emphasizes that when we come together and work as one, we are truly stronger together. The Lunn Lecture series exemplifies this spirit, remaining free and accessible to all. Thanks to the generosity of the donors who believe in the importance of critical history discourse. And if this tradition inspires you, we welcome your partnership. I'd also like to recognize the invaluable support of the co-sponsors, Cinema and Digital Media, Gender, Sexuality and Women's Studies, German and Russian, Medieval and Early Modern Studies, Religious Studies, Science and Technology Studies, Sociology, and the Manetti Shrem Museum of Art. This collaboration really is a testament to the unity within our college and campus, and our commitment to being greater together for the common good. Thank you all for joining us today. I look forward to an engaging lecture and a powerful film that exemplifies the enduring value of scholarship and the arts. Veronika and Severin, welcome again to UC Davis. Let's get started.
Thank you, Dean Adequana. That was wonderful, a wonderful introduction. And now I'd like to introduce the speakers. I'm very pleased to introduce them, Veronika Franz and Severin Fiala. They are known to cinephiles as Franz and Fiala, and sometimes as simply F and F, although in cinephile speak, that also means fast and furious, so I'm going to stick with Franz and Fiala at the moment. Franz was a journalist and film critic before making films with her partner, the noted Austrian director and producer, the noted Austrian director and producer Ulrich Seidel. Fiala is her nephew, and their distinguished writing-directing partnership arguably began when he was around 14, eager to see more horror films than were available in the VHS store in his hometown outside of Vienna. Franz made a deal with him. If he would come to her home in Vienna to babysit her children, she would compensate him in VHS rentals. It might have been cheaper to pay him, because he recalls renting between 10 and 15 films that he would binge overnight. When she returned from her trips, she inquired which films were his favorites. They discovered that they liked many of the same ones, ranging from genre titles to classics to art house mainstays of directors like Michael Haneke, Lars von Trier, and Gaspar Noé. Many of these films shared a personal vision, together with a willingness to push boundaries in exploring uncomfortable issues most people would prefer not to face. Such traits characterize the films they've made together after Fiala graduated from film school. Their first was a documentary, Kern, 2012, about the Austrian director-actor Peter Kern, a visionary artist who was both fascinating and at times crazy, even monstrous as a person. This was followed by their first fictional horror film, Goodnight Mommy, which was an international hit, as well as Austria's first official nominee for the Academy Award for Best International Feature. Their first English language film, The Lodge, debuted in 2019. Like Goodnight Mommy, it anatomized with clinical precision how the ordinary psychodramas between parents and children can devolve into psychotic breaks when subject to mounting pressures of suspicion, emotional deprivation, and isolation. As Fiala explained, quote, "We make horror films because they allow us to explore the human condition in its rawest form, Fear reveals who we are. They are currently working on another film of familial dysfunction and possible demonic possession. Ambiguity and the uncanny are also central to their works, based on Paul Tremblay's acclaimed horror novel, A Head Full of Ghosts. Their most recent film, The Devil's Bath, 2024, has received numerous awards at international film festivals, and as you heard, is this year's Austrian nominee for the Academy Awards. It's their first historical film, based on UCD professor Kathy Stewart's research for her book, Suicide by Proxy in Early Modern Germany, which also came out this year, and just won the 2024 Natalie Zeman Davis Prize in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. How Franz and Fiala discovered Kathy's work and what they made of it is, of course, the topic of today's lecture. She will be joining them during the Q&A as well, too. From my perspective, as Kathy's colleague since 1992, she and they were predestined to meet. Kathy, too, is intuitively drawn to the odd, the marginal, and the malign, and how their seemingly anomalous stories yield wider meanings. The odd and the marginal are also attracted to her. Most historians find only documents in the archives. She found a skull, among other things, as she related today. The Devil's Bath is a historical film, but is also a horror film in the Franz and Fiala fashion, making visceral for audiences the limited options for peasant women in 18th century German society, as well as the inescapable pressures for everyone to conform to highly restrictive social and religious codes. If you see the film, which is being shown for free tonight in Cruz Hall, room 1002 at 8:15, listen carefully for its final sound, a punctuation of horror. I began this introduction with the fun fact that the filmmakers are related as aunt and nephew. They may be the first such pair in the history of filmmaking. When I asked ChatGPT about this, it couldn't find any other examples, and then, unbidden, it proceeded to hallucinate why this relationship was important. Quote, the aunt-nephew relationship offers a different kind of dynamic compared to siblings or parent-child partnerships in filmmaking. Veronika Franz, who has a long career in journalism and screenwriting, brings a wealth of experience and a guiding mentorship to Severin Fiala, who is younger and began filmmaking in his 20s. This generational difference may contribute to their complementary strengths, with Franz providing depth and structure, and Fiala offering fresh perspectives and technical enthusiasm. So, with evidence-free conclusions like this, why we tell students do not use ChatGPT, do not rely on it. However, Ulrich Seidel did make an illuminating comment about the synergy between Franz and Fiala. He called it, quote, an interplay of precision and passion. This interplay is striking in their films, which combine carefully composed, beautifully austere shots with intensely emotional scenes and flashes of surrealistic, horrific imagery, which might represent another world, or the inner worlds of the characters, or both. Precision and passion echoes Friedrich Nietzsche's distinction between the Apollonian drive towards formal, ordered beauty and the Dionysian drive towards the fervent and the transcendent. Eugene Lunn wrote and lectured about Nietzsche, and I'm sure he made the Apollonian and the Dionysian watchwords for his students in his European intellectual history classes. So, to add to the uncanny confluence between Franz and Fiala and Kathy Stewart, we have a strange synchronicity between them and the Lunn Lectureship itself. Welcome to the Twilight Zone. And please welcome this year's speakers, Veronika Franz and Severin Fiala.
Hello. We'll start with the trailer to our film that you get an impression what you're up to tonight.
Koster det?
Det er synd. Skat,
Was denn?
das ist verknackt.
Agnes.
Post ist eigen. Ja, wird schon.
Ja, gut, wir können weiter mit dir, wenn es den Mocker essen lässt.
Wegen deiner Mutter.
Steht mir nicht.
Magst du mich nicht? Vielleicht nicht kurz.
Jetzt geht es wieder schon.
Siehst du nicht, dass das aber blätter wird?
Die wird sich schon einfinden. Gibst du dir ein wenig Zeit?
Scheiße, wenn es der Herrgott geschickt.
Sag mal, Agnes, wo hast du das Kind her? Jetzt stehst du auf und ziehst dich an.
Ich mache das in Teufelsbrot.
Grüß dich. Bitte verstoß mich nicht rein.
Well, hello. This is for later.
Just preparing.
Thank you so much for your really great and entertaining introduction. We kind of blushing. Yeah, we are, as you have heard, Veronika
And Severin, two Austrians who are by no means historians or academics, scientists, lecturers.
we didn't even finish university.
So, we're the writers, readers, writers and directors of the film The Devil's Bath, our first feature-length films, and we're incredibly proud and honored to be here in front of you all of today. We want to thank the University of Davis for inviting us, as well as our friend and the professor at this facility, Kathy Stuart, on whose research our period film is based.
Since our movie, The Devil's Bath, had its world premiere competition at this year's Berlinale, we have been asked over and over again in interviews if we had always been dreaming of doing a period film. The honest answer, no.
Never, absolutely not.
Making a period film is the single thing we have been most afraid of, and that's quite something considering we are horror film directors dealing with darkest abysses of society. But for us, nothing scarier than bringing history to the screen. So why did we attempt to do so? We would go as far as to say it's all Kathy Stewart's fault. Without her and her work, our film would not exist. And we would have never discovered one of the darkest and most fascinating chapters of early modern history.
Another one of the popular questions coming up in interviews is, how did you come across Kathy Stewart's research in the first place? As is true more often than not, it was all a total coincidence. We listened to an episode of the podcast This American Life.
And we never listen to podcasts.
It was about loopholes, and one of the loopholes briefly touched upon was suicide by proxy, a loophole that poor people in early modern history found to evade the church dogma that suicide is the worst crime possible because it's the only sin you cannot repent. Why? Well, because after committing suicide, you're dead. So suicidal people came up with a different idea to work their way around this problem. They killed somebody else to get sentenced to death, because before their execution, they could still confess to a priest and go to heaven. Smart.
And shocking. What also shocked us was that we had actually never heard about any of this, even though many of the cases took place in our home country, Austria, and the phenomenon was spread out all across Europe. So why does nobody knows about this? The question fueled our curiosity, and we got in touch with Cassie Stuart, who entrusted us with her research containing hundreds of cases and dozens of interrogation transcripts of women and men who were executed for murders committed as suicide by proxy. Our journey started with this brief spark of curiosity that infected us when we first listened to the podcast in 2014. Lucky us, back then we didn't have any idea how big of a journey it would turn out to be. We only finished our film this year, 10 years later. One of the various reasons we hate period films. They just take so long to make. Our producer Ulrich Seidel, for example, is working on a period film about the notorious Austrian robber, Johann Georg Grasl. He started more than 30 years ago. And the famous Danish director, Karl Theodor Dreyer, wanted to make a film about Jesus all his life. He died before even starting. So why did we even start such a tedious endeavor?
Because of Eva Litzelfellner, the woman on whose life our film is mainly based upon. Eva Litzelfellner was a young Austrian who killed a child in 1761 for reasons that can be explained with suicide by proxy, because she was suffering what today we would call a severe depression. Back in the day, they said she was caught in the devil's bath, an expression that became the title of our movie. She was interrogated several times, but not only her, also her husband, her family, the woman she bought poison from, the people around her. And that draws an incredibly detailed picture of a life we would otherwise know nothing about, if Eva hadn't committed an atrocious crime to end her life. Only that crime made it necessary for authorities to record a life otherwise deemed uninteresting. As you probably know, history for the longest time was never interested in ordinary people, especially not in women. So this detailed account was a treasure shedding light onto a blind spot of the silence of history. That alone would have been reason enough to make a film, maybe a documentary for some history channel.
But that's not who we are. For us, film is more than dumping information on an audience. It's neither solely intellectual nor cerebral. It is also emotional, spiritual, psychological. It talks about the subconscious, like a dream one has, or a nightmare in this case. And reading the interrogation protocol of Eva Litzelfellner gave us nightmares. And it moved us to tears. This woman from over 250 years ago shared her very personal thoughts with us, her hopes and dreams, her darkest fears. It felt as if she was directly talking to us. Eva was what we would today call a perfectionist, somebody who felt she could never be good enough, who felt she could never fulfill the expectations society had of her, and who didn't blame society but herself. She was also a melancholic who, her native German, in her native German, or Austrian, said, "Ich bin niemals gern zum Tanz gegangen." Translated, she never liked to attend dances or social events, because she was a shy person, a bit of an outsider, also an immigrant, who couldn't connect to the place she moved to. Although it was only 17 kilometers from her hometown, it was a much smaller world back then. She and what she was going through felt so incredibly modern to us. And it was then when we finally realized we just had to make a film about her and about suicide by proxy. A film, for us, about dogmatism, about the pressure society puts on us, about the prisons people live in, and about the systems that create those prisons. We felt the need to make that film because it's not only talking about the past, but also about our modern world, about the fact that the number of cases of depression and mental health issues are on the rise. There we had it, a period piece, talking about today, but still a period piece. The thing we were most afraid of, and no way to escape. We had to face it. So the only remaining question was, how? How can you recreate history in a movie?
There are a ton of horrible historical movies. Film history is full of them. We're sure you've seen a few. Films full of plastic swords and fake beards. Fakes that also very much look fake. There is a lot of other challenges as how to come to from a whatever fascinating chapter of history to a motion picture. First of all, period films are, as you probably can imagine, more expensive and therefore harder to finance. One needs locations, depending on the era the film is set in, without any signs of modern life, most likely without power lines, without the sounds of highways and airplanes, and without cars and concrete. The famous Japanese director Akira Kurosawa was once asked why he framed an iconic shot of his period masterpiece Run exactly how he did it. His answer was that if he had panned the camera 1 inch to the left, the Sony factory would be sitting there exposed, and if he had panned 1 inch to the right, we would have seen the airport. Those are some of the factors determining decisions when making a period film.
So, where does one find places without any signs of our modern world? Not too many people will say positive things about the Cold War. However, in our case, the Iron Curtain came to our movie's rescue. We shot in the most northern part of Austria, the Waldviertel, very close to the Czech border, an area that used to be sort of a no man's land, neither cultivated by the Czech side nor by the Austrian one, something like a buffer zone, and a great chance for our film. Buildings from the 18th century have never been renovated there. Even after the Cold War ended, nobody really moved there. Houses turned into ruins, and actually, that's a good thing. Don't know if you're aware, but film actually makes everything look more beautiful, posher than you would think, judging from what you see with your own eyes. It's very hard to have a properly renovated house and make it look authentic for a period film. Believe us, we tried. Our first instinct was to shoot the film where Eva Lisselfender's stories actually took place in Upper Austria. However, that's a richer area nowadays, and all the houses from the 18th century were properly renovated, beautiful to look at, great to live in. On film, however, they look like the totally fake Disney version of an 18th century house. Take a ruin on the other hand, and while everybody during the shoot will think, what the hell is this? It will look great and authentic on film.
However, our film was an Austrian-German co-production and we had to shoot in Germany as well. And whereas we found great ruins and locations in Austria, it proved much more difficult in Germany. For reasons of subject matter, our film had an increased demand for execution sites. In Austria, not a problem. We Austrians love execution sites. And they all look beautiful and they're still there. Unfortunately, that's not very true for Germany. After extensive research, we found out there is nearly no existing execution sites from that time in Germany. As there are more than enough left in Austria, you might think, oh, why didn't we shoot everything in Austria? But that's not how the movie world works. For financial reasons, we needed to shoot those scenes in Germany as well. So we needed to build new execution sites instead of using old real ones in Austria, which of course is more expensive and a risk. Because however well you build film locations, they might still feel artificial. To prevent that, we insisted on our builds to be fully functional, built with real stones, not out of plastic. So what you're seeing is actually one of the rare, real existing execution sites in Germany that we basically rebuilt, or our production designers rebuilt. Those were some of their sketches. Here you see actually how they tried to build it, and that's how it looks in the film, with somebody beheaded over it. So one could have been properly executed there because it was fully functional if one wanted. But usually actors don't like to be executed for real. They have more at their hands enough already. From one day to the other, they need to learn how to plow fields without a tractor, like in the Middle Ages, by horse or by ox. They have to swing the scythe. And it looks ridiculous, as if they learned it only the day before, because actually that's the case. Because there is no time, because time is money and film is an expensive art form. So yes, period films are expensive, and yes, they are challenging for actors. However, even with all the money in the world and with all the Oscar-winning actors, you might still end up with a film attempting to recreate history that's just creating kitsch and cliché, because there are no real experiences to draw from, no real life. So what do you draw from?
In the history of historical films, the answer is often paintings. Paintings are our best source to recreate the time no one of us and no one we know has lived through, right? That's a tricky question. We all know the situation of going to a photographer. We are not talking about a snapshot, taken in a moment, we are not paying attention to the camera, but about a scheduled appointment. We usually dress up for that. We do our hair. We specifically decide how we want to look in the photo. Now imagine having your portrait drawn. It's even worse. Do you want to be painted looking like a total mess? We don't think so. You want to look great. That's why many paintings show an idealized version of people, of their working conditions, their homes, the circumstances they were living in. If you take those as a source, if you try to recreate them in a film, you will most likely end up with a cliché, recreating something that doesn't show the truth in the first place. The same goes for movies. You might know one of the earliest films in history, La Sortie de l'usine Lumière à Lyon, by the Lumière brothers, shot in 1895. It consists just of one shot. Let's take a look at it.
So, what did we see here? Workers leaving the factory? What seems like the purest form of documentary filmmaking, you just put up a camera and observe in one single uncut shot, does in fact not reflect reality. Of course, the workers knew that they would be being filmed that day. They dressed up in their best clothes, nothing they would normally wear to work. Also, of course, there were more than one takes being filmed. What seems like a documentary, like a valid source of how workers looked leaving a factory in 1895, turns out to be totally inauthentic. Still, period films have always recreated paintings. One of the biggest influences, for example, was the Dutch painter Lorenz Alma Tadema, one of the most highly renowned romantic artists in the 19th century, even though his art lost significance over time, at least in the art world. He had a second life in the film world. Tadema's afterlife in cinema is going from Italian silent cinema of the 1910s over Cecil B. DeMille's Ten Commandments in 1956 to Ridley Scott's Gladiator in 2000. But more often than not, these paintings talk more about the times they were made in than about the times they are depicting. They are used as allegories or even propaganda, and were not so interested in accurately showing a specific time in history. So let's look at another example from Stanley Kubrick's iconic period piece, Barry Lyndon. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So that's the painting, and that's still from Barry Lyndon. I go back and forth like once or twice. So that's the film still, and that's the painting. I mean, you can look at like how the things like fall to the floor are arranged, and the heads and like the sword, like how the feet.
It's, as you can see, remarkable how meticulously Kubrick recreates William Hoggett's painting. But what does it say about the 1750s, during which the film is set? Yes, the painting is from 1743, but doesn't Kubrick's film reflect the style of painting, the light, the art from that time, and not so much the life of the time? Or, to frame the question differently, is a science fiction film from the 1970s about the future or about the 1970s? Certainly a bit about both. As much as Barry Lyndon is at the same time about the 1970s when it was made, and about the art from the 18th century, paintings, literature, etc. That's a very valid approach for historic movies. However, for our film, we didn't want to alienate the audience from the time the film is set in. Also, we didn't want to intellectualize or talk about the art of the times, because our protagonists were deprived of those pleasures. Art didn't play a big part in their lives, maybe none, except for the paintings hanging in church. We wanted the people we depict to feel immediate, authentic, believable. We wanted the audience to feel the cold and the mud, the flesh and the blood. We wanted it to literally smell our film. Although we were, of course, aware that you usually can't smell films.
We started the Devil's Bath with an incredible respect for all of those challenges. One could even say with a lot of fear. Fear to repeat many of the mistakes we had seen in bad period films all our life. How can one capture such a fear? We're sure a lot of you will agree with research. And that's how we began our project. As filmmakers, as filmmaking is always a collaborative endeavor, when we say we don't only mean us. Besides Kathy Stuart, whom we have already mentioned, we also work with two other historians, Barbara Zuber-Goldstein, who researched the place and time the film is set in, and who wrote a 250-page dossier on the Mühlviertel. If anyone is ever interested in the Mühlviertel in Upper Austria in 1750, that's what you will want to read. And finally, our friend and historian Gregor Holzinger, lover of dark and obscure, who compiled extensive notes on medical procedures, superstition, and everything you might want to know or not to know about executions of that time. We learned a lot, very useful things. For example, in Upper Austria, innkeepers put the cut-off fingers of executed people in their beer barrels in order to sell more beer. Or someone who stepped on a rusty pitchfork would rub the fork with lard to prevent an infection. If they were bitten by cats, they would rub the cats with lard.
We also learned a lot of things that actually proved useful for our film, because they defied our cliched image of 18th century Austria. For example, we learned that priests were not oppressing village communities with iron fists. Actually, it was more like a situation of mutual dependency. The priests were depending on the villagers to deliver firewood and crops in order to get through winter time. And the villagers expected the priests to protect them from the wrath of God by ringing the church bells whenever there was a storm, for example. At the 18th century, priests already knew that there was no connection at all between church bells, storms, and God's wrath. They rang them regardless, because they didn't want to starve or freeze. Also, the romanticized image of women washing their clothes in the river, chit-chatting away, having a good time together was destroyed for us by Kathy's research. We are very grateful for that. Women were actually spying on each other. Was there menstrual blood on the other women's clothes? Were they maybe pregnant? Were they still not pregnant? There was a lot of social pressure going on. Another thing we unfortunately learned through research is that there are no paintings about peasant life in Austria in the 18th century. I mean, no. Wait, there are paintings? Let's look at them for a moment.
We've already touched upon the problems with paintings. As you can see, those specific paintings are more than naive. The clothes look like the cliche of what you imagine them to be, nothing for us to use. So we did more and more research trying to unearth what we felt we didn't know about enough. After accumulating a ton of research, we discussed the results and what to make of them. The amount of knowledge was intimidating, and so was the absence of some of the important facts that just couldn't be researched. Then Barbara Zuber-Goldstein said something that liberated us from the heavy burden of historic accuracy. You now know all the facts that you can possibly know, but there are so few sources that you can't draw any final conclusions, so just tell your story in a way that it seems plausible to you. So in the end, all the detailed and precise research led to artistic freedom, and yes, there were also paintings that inspired our work, maybe on a different level than you would think. We didn't imitate the superficial information we found in those paintings. It was more about capturing their essence, their spirit. For example, let's look at the self-portrait of young Rembrandt. For us, it's the essence of depression. We shared the image, as filmmakers do, with our cinematographer Martin Schlacht. Now let's look at the still image of our movie. Another image that greatly inspired us was by Alfred Kuppi. That's another painting that for us signifies depression and inspired the shot in our film.
As you can see, we looked at paintings from different eras and different countries, such as the great work of Gustave Courbet, the most important protagonist of the French realism. He painted and lived 100 years later than our film is set in. We also looked for ideas and details to connect the past with the modern world. Yeah, here you can see like a chaos in the kitchen. Eggs, sunny side up. Naked people. We shared those images with our cinematographer Martin Schlacht and faced questions such as, should we shoot our film in color or black and white, digitally or analog? And how about the use of artificial light? How to avoid the cliché of light that's always golden and beautiful in the paintings that films aims to recreate? Martin Schlacht, our DOP, is very experienced, and he's best when facing impossible challenges. So that's what we did. We wanted to shoot on 35mm film stock in color, not in black and white. Black and white somewhat also felt like cliché, as we all know, black and white photos depicting the past. We tend to think of the past in black and white, which is totally wrong, for example, when thinking of the Middle Ages. The Dark Age is only dark because we know so little of it, not because it's actually dark and without color. Colors played a huge and hugely important role in the Middle Ages. Also, and this might come as a surprise, it played a huge part at the beginning of film history. When we think back to that time, images arise in our minds, black and white images, because the beginning of film history was black and white, right? Wrong. Especially at the beginning of motion pictures, and especially when depicting historical events, films were extremely colorful. In tedious work steps, they were colored by hand, because those earlier period films were recreating and imitating paintings, and those were in color. So one tried to recreate this impression in the movies. The cliché that history is black and white only emerged later. So we decided to shoot on color film stock. Film because it felt less cold, less sterile than digital. Film is alive. It has a special texture that's hard to recreate. And it actually helps to disguise whenever period costumes or production design or makeup are a bit less than perfect. Also, we wanted the film to go very dark and to avoid artificial lighting, all of which is very difficult as film stock is less sensitive to light than digital material. The light meter used to check if it's bright enough to shoot said error from the first day of shooting till the last. The locations were that dark that the crew took their cell phone flashlights out to be able to walk around. Still, we shot in such circumstances. Our DOP and we trusted in film, and film did not disappoint us. But to take a step back, before shooting the film, there were lots of other things to figure out.
You might know a very famous quote by a very famous fellow Austrian. No, not Arnold Schwarzenegger. Although the Austrian we're talking about also didn't stay in Austria for too long. We're talking about Billy Wilder. He fled his home country when the Nazi regime came to power to become one of the most successful film directors in the US. He said, to make a great film you need three things: the script, the script, and the script. As often in history, it's debatable if Billy Wilder actually said that, or if it was one of the many other people that the quote is attributed to. We still very much agree with it. And before starting to write our script for The Devil's Bath, we actually believed it would be an easy task. As it was based on extensive research and interrogation transcripts, we felt it's all there, right? What else could we do with that but write an excellent courtroom drama? Well, in our finished film, there is not a single scene that takes place in a courtroom. Eva Litzelfellner's interrogation that had moved us so much in the first place lost all its impact in the courtroom drama version of the film. Why? In the transcript, it felt as Eva was directly addressing us, as she was telling her story to us. That's a huge difference to the courtroom drama in which the audience usually watches two people talk. And that was exactly the problem. Our Eva, or as she's called Agnes in the film, was not talking to the audience. She was talking to an interrogator, and that greatly diminished the emotional impact of the film. That's what made us realize that we needed to find a way of communicating Eva's inner horror to an audience, which led her to committing a child murder. We tried to do something that wasn't a big thing in history until quite recently. We based our period film on how our lead character felt. That approach leads to quite a different result than just focusing on what she did and how she lived. It enabled us to reduce the distance between our character and the audience, because other than life circumstances, feelings remain unchanged. Eva also felt what we are still feeling today: alienation, sadness, loneliness, fear, the need to function as one feels like falling apart. This approach makes sure an audience gets close to her, that it feels for her as we felt for Eva when reading the interrogation transcripts for the first time.
That was the biggest hurdle to overcome in the writing process. Another big one was the language. How did people, farmers in the 18th century talk? The interrogation transcripts hint at a strong rural dialect. Plus, we didn't want to write some artificial language that might distance the viewers even more. We wanted our film to have an immediate power. So we decided to have our actors improvise the dialogue during the shoot in a strong dialect of the region we set the film in. For us, as we briefly touched upon earlier, the story of Eva is also one of immigration. Even though she moved only 17 kilometers from one town to the next back in her days, that meant to travel to a totally different world, with different fields of work, different customs, different dialects. We also tried to take that into account. Anja Plaschk, who plays our lead character, talks in her native Styrian dialect, and so does the rest of her film family. Everyone else talks in a strong Upper Austrian dialect, a move to further alienate our lead character from the rest of the world. And the hardest thing when it comes to language in a period film, to get rid of all the modern okays when improvising. We seem to say okay all the time. So did our actors, although we gave them a small dictionary of old expressions from the 18th century to learn and use whenever they wanted. When wanting to work in such a manner, the most important thing is to find actors willing to collaborate. The actors we found for Devil's Bath all have one thing in common. None of them has been professionally trained. And they all had a background growing up as farmers. As we pointed out, film is an expensive art form, and usually there's too little money and therefore too little time. That's why most productions try to play it safe and hire professional actors, because they're deemed more reliable, more efficient, more, professional. We chose to take the opposite route.
The greatest danger we sense to a period piece is that it feels lifeless and artificial. That's why we wanted to work with non-professional actors, because there is room for spontaneity, room for real life. Non-professional actors don't have the skill set to fake what we want them to act in scenes. Still, not all non-professional actors are willing to take things as far as to open up and really experience something during a scene. Our actors did. To prepare themselves, they moved into the film's main location, which lacked all the comfort of modern life, such as electricity or gas. They lived in the darkness and the cold with lots of silence and unfamiliar noise, such as mice. They really cooked on the stove. They set up the kitchen for themselves so that it was practical. Not practical for the camera angle, but practical for cooking. We didn't fake the cooking process so that it looked well on film, but we had observed the process as it was, much like you would expect from documentary filmmaking. Anja Plaschk, who plays our lead character, wanted to experience as many things for real as possible. Therefore, she was our greatest weapon in fighting artificiality. There is a scene in the movie in which she runs through a field of thorns. No actress would ever do a thing like that, but Anya did. She ran through the thorns because she specifically didn't want to fake anything, but to experience it. Same goes for the moment in which she takes poison and her husband wants to make her throw up. We shot it several times, and after each take, Anya complained that the actor who played her husband didn't put his fingers down deep enough in her throat. He kept trying and trying. Ultimately, he had to accept that his fingers were just too short to make her throw up. That's some of the more extreme examples of what level of reality our actors were willing to bring to the film. But it's not only those extreme moments that create the film's authenticity, it's also small details, cooking scenes, for example.
Cooking in period films is usually horrible. The wrong kinds of vegetables are used and they are prepared the wrong way. And the finished dishes might look great, but there is no chance you can actually eat them. Let's take a quick look at the cooking scene from our movie.
Wie viel Phantom hast du schon gehört?
Echt?
Ja.
Im Koch?
Ja, ja. Und denkt da mit 10 Phantoms oder mit 10 Wolfrecht? Kennst du das nicht?
Nein.
Okay, das ist ja krass.
Das war's.
Was du 3 bist. Frische Pfannen noch, aber über einen Anstück darfst du es nicht. Wenn es hingeht, geht es da so und sonst hast du geholt da hängen. Schwer.
Also ist der Beton ist.
Aber den Platz brauchst du zum Kochen. Hast du ein Tort drin? Im Sack?
Was?
Das Tort? Das tust du dann gescheiter nicht durchnehmen, alles was zum Essen ist.
Tut's da nicht schimmeln?
Nein, nein. Agnes, das Bett nicht vergessen.
Modern themes. As already mentioned, Anya moved into the main location and she cooked for us several times. She's a great cook, we have to say. And her porridge was, other than the cliche we had from food at that time, pretty amazing. And she didn't prepare it according to film directors' directions. Things like, first you take the flour, then you look to your mother-in-law and say, or stand here in the light, then the camera is going to pan left and you take a spoonful of porridge. Anya just cooked the porridge as one would do in a kitchen, used in the 18th century, as it felt right for her as a human being with a lot of cooking experience. Another thing to pay attention is the burning stick you just saw of wood she puts into her mouth to see what's going on in the pot. We found this fact through research, that people put those burning sticks between their teeth to have their hands free to work. So, normally in a film, you would tell your actress to put the stick into her mouth after this or that line. Of course, that would feel totally artificial, because a wooden stick in your mouth feels very wooden and artificial. But Anya cooked in that kitchen several times, and then when it was dark outside, the only source of light was the fire underneath the pot. So she couldn't see what was going on inside of the pot. Was the food burning? She's holding the pot with one hand and steering the food with the other, so there was no free hand for her to hold a candle or something like that to look into the pot. She herself realized that, and finally put the burning stick of wood between her teeth. In that very moment in time, it was her idea. And that's what ultimately makes it so believable. And that's how we try to work with our actors. We don't want to instruct them, to tell them what to do every step of the way. It should come from them. It should be their idea. Only then it would feel truly authentic. Only then it is a version of real life.
We took this method even further when staging the wedding party at the beginning of the movie. Normally, you would place your extras in front of the camera. Once the camera would roll, you would have the musicians play, or in some cases, not even that, as the music might complicate the editing process. So most of the time you have extras fake dancing in front of the camera and nowhere else on set, and musicians who appear to be playing instruments without making any sounds. What we decided to do was to go for a real party. Music was playing throughout. People were dancing. Our extras were non-professional extras, but farmers, bakers, workers. People from the area we shot the film in. There was real food, drinks, wedding games. All the crew was in costumes as well. Nobody knew where the camera was, what was being filmed. It was total chaos. Our sound guy, who was from Germany and whom we had never worked with before, was shocked. I had no idea what I was signing up for, an historical documentary. Actually, we felt that was a great compliment because this is what we had been going after, finding reality in history and introducing an element of chaos to an otherwise rigid film shoot that greatly helped with us with that. In the final party scene in the film, we also have a jazz improvisation on historically accurate instruments, hurdy-gurdy and flute, full of historically accurate joy. Of course, the music is totally inaccurate for the time the film is set in. We also worked like this in other scenes. As we mentioned earlier, the thing that gave us nightmares was imagining actors playing peasants, swinging their kite, not knowing how to properly do it. That's why we came up, that's why we don't have anyone cutting crops in our movie. We decided to go for something else, carp fishing. I'll show another excerpt. I just need to find it. This might take, whoops, sorry, I'm not so wrong, yeah.
mag schwer. Schau mal, dass du es beim Kopf vornimmst, dann geht's leichter.
Carp fishing was an important economic factor in the area we shot the film in, and it has been one since the 13th century. Pond farming hasn't changed since that time. It's still done the exact same way as hundreds of years ago. Of course, the fishermen wear rubber boots nowadays and put the fish into plastic barrels, and they transport the fish into town on tractors. Other than that, every aspect of the work remains unchanged. For us and for our film, for us and for our film, that proved to be a total treasure. We had the actual fishermen play in our film, because everything they do in the film is 100% authentic. Authentic in regards of how fishing is done nowadays, authentic in regards of how it always has been done. A historical documentary, once again. A detail we very much like about the fishing scenes is that the fishermen all wear their own hats, because they look used. They feel authentic. However, they are of course historically totally inaccurate. No fisherman would have worn a hat like that in the 18th century. But if we would have gotten historically accurate hats from a museum and would have made the fishermen wear them, they would have felt masqueraded, dressed up. As they are not professional actors, they wouldn't have been able to do what they would normally do in a normal and authentic way. They would feel like actors on a stage. They would start to act, not be themselves. Their hats might be accurate, however, the fishermen would feel inauthentic. So we decided to go for authentic fishermen with their authentic hats, even if they are historically inaccurate.
Let's continue to talk about the costume design. We approached this question inductively. We looked at the materials that were available to the people at the time and about what they actually did, fishing, cutting wood, what might their clothes have looked like, so that the clothing appeared authentic but free of the patina of historical research. Of course, we based details such as the colors of costumes, which were made out of natural materials, on research. We also decided with costume designer Tanja Hausner that there should always be something imperfect about them. There should always be a mistake. After all, garments were passed on from person to person back then. They might be too big, too small, too wide, too tight, mended. So what we wanted was not to have a perfectly tailored film costume which makes the actress look more beautiful. The costumes also were adjusted to the actor's needs. Did the costume look well but was impractical for work because it was too long? We shortened them. Still, when we looked at our actors at the first dress rehearsal, they suddenly looked dressed, like ripped straight from your ordinary costume drama. How could that have happened? We were so disappointed and desperate, and we couldn't think of a solution. The costumes were as we hoped them to be. Still, they didn't look right.
So what did we do? We had the actors wear the costumes, day and night, for weeks and weeks. They even slept in them. One day, 2 of our actresses went shopping to the local supermarket and wondered why everyone was staring at them. It took them a while to realize that it was due to the historical costumes they are wearing. They had totally forgotten about them because they felt so normal to them. That was when they also started to look good. You could really see a difference between photos of the first dress rehearsal and how the actors looked in their costumes months later. Suddenly, the costumes looked authentic. We learned it's not only what you wear, but how you wear it. The famous Russian director Andrei Tarkovsky made one of the greatest period films of all time, Andrei Rublev, about the life and time of the well-known icon painter. His film is full of historical inaccuracies, yet it feels real. The tools used by farmers are functional, they look authentic, yet they are inaccurate. They are, on purpose, no museum pieces. They feel as ordinary as tools need to feel. That's why they are fully believable.
We were trying to take a similar route. One of the main faults of period films is that they want to illustrate the period that they are set in every single moment, in every single detail. Everything screams period all the time. The costume, the hairstyle, the locations, the language, all of them seem to be fighting for attention of the audience, competing to signify the period the strongest. Of course, this leads to a moment of alienation for the audience. They are never allowed to be immersed in the story. They are never allowed to forget that they are watching a period film. No, they are even forced to think about the period all the time. That's not what we aimed for. We didn't try to say, look at those peasants from the 18th century. They were so different from us. Look at the hair, weird. Their clothes, ridiculous. We didn't want to say that because it would have been the total opposite of what we experienced while reading the interrogation transcripts of Eva Litzelfellner. We didn't hear the voice of a woman that was different from us. We heard a very modern voice. What she said was still relevant for all of us living today, and that's the impression we try to recreate. Something immediate, on eye level, not judging her, making fun of the time she lived in, but taking her and her time seriously. And if you don't allow the audience to forget that they're watching a period piece, then you're not taking the period you're depicting seriously.
Thank you so much for listening. We now want to close with a very brief quote from famous Russian director Andrei Tarkovsky. Historical pictures must not be staged as costume dramas. That's a mistake. We couldn't agree more.
Thank you so much.
Oh, good. The lights are on. Great. Thank you so much. That was really marvelous. Right now, so now, Veronika and Severin are going to have joined us on stage, and Kathy Stuart will also join us for the question and answer session. And so feel free to raise your hand, and what we'll do is send a roving mic to you so everybody can hear your question. And so I'm happy to take a question. I could start with a question and let you ponder. Do we have one? Or? Yes, all right, great, absolutely. Done, yes.
Is this working?
I think it's working.
Okay, I would just like to know, apart from what Michael said about you and the uncanny having this kind of magnetic relationship to one another, I would like to know how you got interested in and got involved in this topic.
Okay. Well, so my first book was called Defiled Trades and Social Outcasts, and that book dealt with unclean professions in early modern Germany, and at the center of that phenomenon was the executioner. And so I had to spend a lot of time figuring out how the execution ritual works. And as I delved in those sources, I came actually across a couple of those cases. And that's how I first discovered the practice of suicide by proxy. But my first book actually got me hooked on the history of crime, and that's all I ever intend to do.
Yes, Chuck. Or no, that's Ed, sorry. Yeah, Ed.
Sorry, so it was absolutely wonderful to hear you talk about the process of actors getting comfortable with the physical setting. Did your actors become comfortable with the psychology of the actions of those people?
Yeah, maybe we can briefly talk about how we found our lead actress, who is great in the film but had never actually acted before. She's a famous musician in Austria, and we felt, judging from her music, that she sort of maybe we felt could relate to the subject matter of the film. So we actually approached her as a composer for the film and sent her the script. And then we met to discuss the script, and actually she talked a lot about this lead character, and we got the feeling, okay, she knows more about her than we do. And she comes from a farming background, talked a lot about mental health issues in her family, about like her grandmother, great-grandmother, their stories. So she could really relate to a lot of that already. And then we always try to include and incorporate things that actors bring to a project. For example, like in our film, Agnes, she collects dead insects. That's something we took from Anya, so we tried to incorporate as many things that she brought onto the project as possible. And what we also did, of course, was share the interrogation transcripts of Eva Litzerfellner, of the real woman, and the script. And Anya prepared extensively, so we even pushed the film for another year for her to have time to really get into the mindset. And she spent a lot of time with that character, and that's of course not easy. She even went as far as, we felt, giving herself up, because she felt it was so important to tell that story and to open up to that story, so that our main task, I think, was create an environment that she could feel safe in, and also have the feeling that she can get back from that journey and that character again. So actually it was what you wouldn't expect after seeing the film maybe tonight. It was a very happy shoot for us, and a very nice experience for everybody involved. I mean, you wouldn't think that, but
I think you can shoot everything, like every dark thing, if you have trust, if there is trust between the crew, like between the actors and the directors. If you can establish that will kind of carry you through whatever you are going to shoot. So, and of course there were like happy moments and then sad moments, but we kind of shared that. That's how I think that's how we worked.
I haven't seen the film yet, but in the scenes you showed, there's a lot of interaction between the mother-in-law and the daughter. I was wondering if you could talk about that. It seems that there's a very ambiguous relationship, that she is caring, but she's also mean. It seems very modern. Did you want to make that historical in some sense? Did it need to be accurate, or was that just the human drama that you just think is?
No, let's
I'm the historian.
So that comes directly out of the interrogation protocol, where Eva Litzerfellnerin talks about how when she arrived in her new village, she was trying to make friends with her new neighbors by giving small gifts, but her mother-in-law forbade it. And then also when field hands were being fed, Eva Litzerfellnerin had trouble. She wasn't a good cook, and she said, "I'm not a good cook." That's part of the whole perfectionist thing. But then, so she had the mother-in-law cook for the field hands and the family. But then she heard that the field hands complained about miserly portions, and she was afraid that the field hands wouldn't return to work during the next season. But on one occasion, the mother-in-law was not home, so Eva Litzerfellnerin herself had to cook for the field hands. And then she cooked, and apparently it was pretty unpalatable, and the field hands complained. And then she was very devastated. Apparently she quoted a field hand saying that if the old Litzerfellner, the father-in-law, who was dead, I mean, she never met him, but if he had been still living, he would have thrown the food at the wall. That's what a field hand said. And so then she said, this is the direct quote, "It's true that I'm not a good cook, but I thought if Wolf, her husband, if Wolf and I eat it, then the field hands should eat it too," is what she said. So there's that. So from her perspective, the mother-in-law. She really didn't like her, and she actually said that the mother-in-law had a nasty gob. And so that comes through in the interrogation record. But one thing that I think is fantastic in the movie is in the interrogation record, of course, you only have the perspective, or not only, but you really have Eva Litzefenerin's perspective on the mother-in-law. And what I thought that they did fantastically in the movie is to broaden the lens to consider what this dynamic also means for the other people in the family. And I thought that the mother-in-law, you know, she also was under economic pressures, dealing in a harsh subsistence economy. And so that explains part of the pressures that she's under.
That also goes for the husband, by the way. So, I mean, you have this cliche from like historic movies of this, you know, violent husband who kind of beats her, and actually, yeah, was not the case.
Yeah. So this guy, this was quite remarkable in the interrogation record. So first off, they ask, and this is an interesting distinction in terms of sex. So. It always is the case, so they ask in the interrogation record, did you pay each other the marital debt? In other words, you know, did you have sex? And then Agnes says, or rather Eva says, yes, we did that. And then, but the interactions between her and her husband, Wolf, were very affectionate, as they come across in the interrogation record. She used the diminutive to refer to him. She didn't call him Wolf. She called him Wolf Fiala, which is like little Wolf. It's a diminutive. It's a term of affection. And then at one point in the interrogation record, the interrogator says, "Did you ever tell your husband or anybody else about how you were feeling?" And then she said, "Yes, I said sometimes I wish I weren't in the world." And then her husband said, "Oh my girl, when you speak like that, it makes me so sad." And he began to weep, the husband. And after that, she said, "I never told him again." So, in other words, in reality, their relationship was quite companion and affectionate, but
Actually, no but, because I think what Kathy said about how we also try to show the mother-in-law, I think it's true for the husband as well. I think the great danger in doing a film like ours is that you talk about the woman descending into depression and being forced into committing an atrocious crime, and it's very easy, like if you have this one person to blame, like to point your finger at and say, oh, it's because the mother-in-law was very mean, or the husband is an evil wife beater, and that's what went wrong. And actually, we tried on purpose, like not to do it because, like, the whole society is to blame, and church dogmatism is to blame in a way for what happens to her, and all the others, as Kathy mentioned, also under an extensive amount of pressure, also trying to function, and they're also victims of a society that all of us create, and that all of them created in a way.
For this hugely entertaining talk about a film called The Devil's Bath, which I never was expecting. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more of the role, like how you think about audio in terms of your filmmaking. I think of audios like sound and music as being so important to things like horror, and I know you mentioned there were live musicians that were actually playing, and you didn't want to have musicians just pretending to play. Could you say a little bit more about how you think about using music or sound in a period piece?
Yeah, I think there's different aspects to that. I think one is like the score, the music, because like Anya, we approached her very early on and felt this could be like an interesting journey for the film to take. To start like at a film that uses accurate historical instruments of that time and music of that time, and the further the film moves along, the further the music or the score should also move into something modern, something that's more also recreating her own feeling of depressions and externalizing her, like her inner nightmares in a way. So I think that was what we tried to do with the music. When it comes to sound, like in all our films that are, the others are considered more a horror film than that one, I think what we always do is our sound design is, let's say, it's very quiet and very limited as opposed to like Hollywood scary movies. Because actually I think the scary movie is the same like as we talked about period pieces that remind you of the period all the time. Horror films try to remind you all the time that you're watching a horror film. And actually for us that's as boring as being reminded that we're watching a period film all the time. So I think not having sound design and having a very quiet film, I think throws the audience back to themselves in a way, and they have to ask themselves, what am I seeing here? How should I feel? I think it asks a question, and that makes an audience insecure, and actually it makes them, in a sense, more afraid or aware than overdone sound design. So that's another layer, and I think the third one is like what you mentioned, or what we talked about, like the documentary aspect. So a lot of things we did are deemed very unprofessional, so you would never shoot like that. Like normally, like even when you shoot the dialogue between two people, you shoot, let's say, first a shot on you, and the other people is off screen, other person wouldn't actually talk because it limits your possibilities of how to edit. So one is just mouthing the dialogue and the other one is talking. And this is really hard for actors, even professional actors. Our actors were non-actors, so we tried to make everything as easy as possible for them and as hard as possible for the editing person. It was madness, it was just a documentary, and of course you're very limited if you work like that, but we did everything to make it as easy as possible for the actors.
Bill?
I have a question about the way in which this woman was judged. You mentioned that she was interrogated. Presumably, is this a court that was authorized to convict and have the judgment immediately executed, or was the judgment subject to appeal? And was it an appellate court that made the final decision that conviction and death?
So, in continental Europe, it's the inquisitorial procedure, and so there was a local appointed official. In this case, he's known as a Pfleger, and he was essentially playing the role of the prosecutor, but who's also, doing everything else. So there isn't a division between, defense and prosecution. And he was orchestrating the entire investigative procedure, including trying to find the body of the murdered child, or trying to, in this case there was no autopsy, but there should have been. And then they collect all of their information. And then there are also requirements, legal requirements, that in capital cases like this, when there would be a question whether a defendant would be melancholic, that the defendant be investigated by 2 independent medical doctors, which ultimately happened, but didn't happen at first. There was only 1 medical examination, and then the Pfleger got reprimanded by higher authorities in the Upper Austrian government, because the file goes from the local court, or from his local office essentially, which is also the prison and everything else, then goes to the Upper Austrian government, and then officials there review the case, and then decide if everything's up to snuff, which it wasn't, because they needed a second medical examiner, which they got, and then ultimately both agreed that this woman was not melancholic, and that therefore she could be held criminally liable. And then the local Pfleger formulates a sentence and sends it forward to the Upper Austrian government, and then they confirm it, and then they give the order for the executioner to show up at a certain time. and that's how it proceeds.
So Bill, and we have time really for one or two more questions before the reception, so if you have one, raise your hand.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to the relationship between Agnes and Wolf. And I mean, it's a great film, and I could say lots of things about it, but I just want to focus really on the men in the picture right at the moment, because it struck me, first of all, that in both the case of seemingly in her own family, but also in her husband's family, the senior farmer, the Hofinhaber, so to speak, the man in charge of the holding was absent, and in many places this would not have been the case. You had to replace that farmer in order to have a viable economic unit. But let me just say that and move on to what I'd rather focus on, which is the presentation of the wedding night when they go into their bed. And I would say it was a very interesting depiction of her attitude about what was about to happen, because she presented herself to her husband for sexual intercourse very willingly. And I interpreted that as a sign that she wanted to fulfill her function as a mother. And after all, her whole, in a way, the tragedy was that she didn't have a child. So she was seeking to be what the society expected her to be, a mother, but it didn't happen. And then there's this problem that, you know, the way Wolf is presented on that wedding night suggests that he isn't really up for it, so to speak. And, you know, and that was preceded by his friendly comment to the handsome Lunns at their wedding party. So it seems to me, I don't know whether this was intended, this kind of reaction that I'm having.
So perfectly observed and understood. I mean, we invented that, right?
Yeah, so that's maybe tough for many people who haven't seen the film yet. I mean, that's one of the things that was not actually from the interrogation protocol, but that we changed because we felt that, like, as we said before, like, we felt that we wanted to tell a story that all the other characters, like, surrounding Agnes, are also, like, an amount of pressure by society. And we felt, in order to make her husband more of an interesting character, we also wanted to give him a secret, something that he's not allowed to talk about, and something that puts him under pressure. And what we came up with is actually, it's never in the film, it's not discussed, it's quite subtle, it's not like no one discusses it, but there are hints that he might be queer or homosexual, and that's the reason why he's actually not having sex with his wife, who wants to be pregnant, who wants to fulfill her function as a mother. And it made us, or for us, it made it even more tragic, because there is nothing she can do about that, but still she thinks she's the one doing something wrong. And he also, there is nothing he can do it, because it's just the way he is, but there's no means of discussing it in that society, and that's what we felt very tragic and why we invented that.
One more question. Don.
Well, I have a question or two of them actually about the subject or topic of the film. And one of them is, presumably this custom, if you want to call it that, started sometime and didn't continue forever. And why at this particular time? And that's one question. The other question is, if people were going to be murdered as part of the suicide by proxy, why murder little kids? Why not murder some adult that you didn't like?
Okay, so first, the question about the chronology of this. The earliest case of suicide by proxy that I was able to identify was from 1580, and it was from Nuremberg. And in general, and there are a couple of other cases. There's a colleague now doing suicide or researching suicide by proxy in Switzerland, and also has cases from the late 16th century. So in other words, this research is really pushing it chronologically backwards. However, as part of the overarching argument of the book, I argue that suicide by proxy could only develop when there was kind of a fateful interlocking of state and church that is post-Reformation and post-implementation of the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation. So it can't really happen until a kind of social disciplining apparatus of the state really gets going after the mid-16th century, and more like the late 16th century, actually. And then that keeps going strong and kind of rises and snowballs and goes viral, increasing by the second half of the 17th century, and then keeps going strong through the 17, without any problem, even from the authorities. They can't come up with effective countermeasures to the middle of the 18th century. It's only in the Enlightenment that the government is trying to come up with effective countermeasures and trying to undermine the ideology underlying suicide by proxy, unsuccessfully. And it really only comes to a conclusion in the early 19th century, and the reason why it ends is because capital punishment in general is declining, very dramatically. So you have far fewer executions to get go. You also have a change in execution methods. It's no longer beheadings, which is what they wanted. They wanted to be beheaded. In the early 19th century, the execution method is hanging, which is dishonorable. They didn't want that. So this is a reason why it would then decline. Another important reason why it would decline at this time is that after approximately 1770, execution rates for women declined dramatically. This also explains why women, there's a change in the gender profile of perpetrators in the late 18th century from women to men. So it ended then. The question on why children, well, you want to make sure that your victim also goes to heaven. So you have to be careful to murder someone who is in a state of innocence. And therefore, ideally, you would murder a child before the age of 7, which is the age of reason. And so then you can actually argue that I have done the child a favor because it might have later sinned. And so therefore now, because of my act of murder, the child will go to heaven, and I will join this child there shortly.
Happy ending.
Yeah. Well, so do we have one more question? One more question. Joby,
I just had a question about melancholia, because, looking at it from a modern point of view, the definition of someone who would be expunged of guilt would be somebody who's insane, right? So how was melancholia interpreted, described, and examined in the period you're looking at?
So in most of these cases, there would be a medical examination, and it was quite extensive. For women, menstrual blood, keep your eye open in the movie for scenes related to menstrual blood, but specifically there is no criminal interrogation record that is complete without documenting the woman's menstrual status. So if a woman's menstruation is blocked, that doesn't necessarily mean she's pregnant, because that can happen from a sudden fright or from a fit of anger or emotional blockage. Then you'll have blocked menstruation, and that is a very clear sign of melancholy. And they can look at the thickness of your blood, etc., and so everybody was examined whether they're melancholic or not. And in different jurisdictions, my impression is that Protestant jurisdictions had a much more expansive view of what constitutes melancholy. So in Protestant jurisdictions, more people received an insanity defense against their will, of course, because they don't want it to be found insane. They want to be executed, but that's not up to them. But in Catholic areas, they were more conservative and more restrictive in applying an insanity defense.
Okay, I think we can talk about melancholy during our reception. One more? Yes, one quick question. One more quick question. Baki? Where's Baki?
I just wanted to ask about the script. You mentioned you let your actors be relatively free, but there's also a script. So you describe the scene and then they act it out the way they come up with things to say, etc. And if that is the case, then how do you do the reshoots if something goes wrong? Do they say the same things somehow?
Yeah, it's not exactly like that. I mean, we had a script and it had dialogue in it, but like we didn't want the actors to learn that. So they knew the script, they knew what the scene was about, but they didn't learn the specific lines to be more free to react and to feel less caged in a way. So for example, in our first film, Good Bad Mommy, we had two kids in there, and they had never acted before, and we shot chronologically for them to grow into the film. And our goal was basically to tell them as little as possible and still make sure the scene would play out as written in the script. Therefore, we needed to get to know them as well as possible and talk to them in a way that we thought would make them react in a way that the script needed and the film needed, but still they would feel it's their own choice in that moment. Because like if you have the feeling you're doing what you want, then it will be more authentic. In that case, we didn't have to take it that far because it was like grown up and sort of, I mean, not professionally trained actors, but very professional actors. So Anja Plaschko is the lead. She could repeat scenes 10 times, completely the same, because she's a musician and she knows, like, she's used to rehearsing and repeating in a way. Still, we felt you feel more free if you are not forced to stick to every word that has been written by somebody who also doesn't have more knowledge about that character than the lead actress. So it would have felt strange for us to say, you need to say this in that moment, because actually with the film she knows more about that character anyway, so she will know what's right to say.
Okay, let's thank our speakers. All three of them. And please join them for further conversation right outside for the reception. Thanks for coming.
One more thing though, please come at 8:15 to Cruise Hall 1002 for the film screening.
Where's Cruise Hall?